Today marks the 20th birthday of Aliens vs Predator 2. I wouldn't have guessed it before I did my research for the original game's review, so don't worry, this boomer's memory isn't that great after all. Rebellion didn't return for this one, now Monolith is taking a shot at it. In case you're expecting more of the same, hold your horses, cause you're in for quite the ride. The main gist of it remains, you've got 3 different campaigns for each of the playable races, but the rest is a very distinct Monolith experience. Yes, that includes the game currently being in a perpetual copyright hell with no hope of getting out, and without any hope of getting a hold of the game save for the AVP Unknown community project. Shouldn't be any surprise really. The publisher Vivendi merged with Activision, Fox, who owns both the Alien and Predator IPs, is now part of Disney, and the developer Monolith has been acquired by Warner Brothers. Good luck untangling all of this. I'm just trying to picture the poor lawyers in charge of sorting that one out. I almost feel sorry for them if they even exist. For starters, a big difference between this game and the original consists in the attention to the single-player campaigns. Not only they're longer, but they have characters that convey the story in a more elaborate way compared to the campy FMVs we've had previously. Even better, all 3 take place in the same place, roughly at the same time, including some instances of playable characters that meet each other during the events of the story. Even if they're inconsequential from a gameplay standpoint, I always liked seeing this in video games. The Marine campaign has you play as Frosty Harrison, a colonial marine that's sent alongside his squad to answer an emergency in a research facility found on, you guessed it, a remote planet involving, guessed it again, a bunch of xenomorphs. Things go bad fast like in any situation that involves them, and our man has to carve his way to the facility. There are multiple things that are obvious from the start. For one, the movement speed is way more reasonable and bunny hopping is no longer possible. Sadly, this plays into the other important change in making the campaign lean more into the horror elements Alien is known for. The game makes a good effort in making you feel vulnerable and on the edge. This trend will continue throughout most of the time playing as the Marine. Sure, the aliens are quite nerfed compared to the last game, something I'll discuss later on, and the arsenal you have at your disposal is quite impressive, but the design is really good. You've got jump scares, not too many or over the top, and you've got some quite brutal cutscenes and set pieces, like when you go rescue some of the captured squad mates from within a hive. This is accentuated in part by the limited tools you have to handle the darkness, since the night vision goggles not only eat your battery like there's no tomorrow, they aren't very high quality either, nor friendly with muzzle fire, and the flashlight doesn't offer a lot of light while also eating through the battery reasonably fast. Monolith really knew how to use the atmosphere, and they sure as hell were able to exploit the source material to its full potential in this sense. Speaking of Monolith, if you've played No One Lives Forever, you'll quickly recognize the hacking and welding torch mechanics down to the T. On one hand, I'm tempted to complain that you need to use the designated button to bring each tool up before using them instead of tying it to the use button, but on the other hand, they don't occur that often and serve to slow down the pace a tad bit, which, considering what I've said about the atmosphere before, it isn't a bad thing necessarily. After finally reaching the research facility, your teams met with reluctance since they're blamed for the deaths that occurred after deactivating the security grid. The expedition leader's behavior is shifty, and once Frosty gets knocked out and imprisoned, the mission turns into a fight for survival instead. All this is peppered with some conspiracy via the mysterious inside help that assists your navigation in exchange for uncovering the corrupt leadership of the facility. You discover that the research conducted is unethical, with an artificial xenomorph hive and experiments conducted on live humans and predators alike. The arsenal is nothing outside of what's to be expected for a colonial marine to have. You may have those big guns, but ammo runs out fast, and the length between pickups means you have to choose your weapons well for each encounter, but the way it's handled via the level design makes for a decently healthy ammo management system. Instead of being the jack of all trades like in the last game, the pulse rifle is still the main workhorse. The smart gun and the minigun instead will be needed to get you out of some very hairy situations, making you regret the bullets you've wasted previously. As I mentioned earlier, the combat isn't as hectic like it was in the original game, and an alien right in your face isn't an instant death screen, but it's still rather challenging. I just wish the flamethrower was more useful so we'd have the ultimate alien experience, but this is nitpicking territory really. The grenade launcher on the other hand is useless. I recognize the multiplayer weapon when I see it and I won't be told otherwise, damn it. After discovering that the rest of your team is being sent on a suicide mission, you're off to save them, and here the difficulty spikes quite a bit. Your enemies become more and more numerous, and visibility is extremely poor most of the time. They aren't very fast, but they're still faster than you, and unless your aim is true, you'll get overwhelmed in no time. Thankfully they have good pathfinding and cheesing them is quite rarely possible, but what takes the cake is the final confrontation against the Predator. After the huge disappointment I've had the last time, the fact that here it actually responds to your actions and is dangerous brings a lot of joy to me. I am very pleased to say that this fight really nails down the feeling of being hunted by a superior opponent. You also fight Predalians and some Praetorians during this campaign, and despite being pretty good moments themselves, this battle against the Predator is the campaign's highlight for me. Unfortunately, right after this high, it's as if they ran out of ideas, and what follows is a section on top of an exosuit, which is different but not a challenge at all, and the final boss, an alien queen, which consists mainly of circle strafing and shooting a big bullet sponge that is unable to hit you. But hey, at least we discovered that the inside help was actually a Japanese lady, and Frosty ends his campaign being outed as a massive weeb.
Tomiko! Tomiko! Tomiko.
Why don't we play as cool guys anymore? Oh my fucking god. The Predator campaign takes place mostly around the same time as Frosty's adventures. Here you play as a high-ranking Predator who's coming for a hunt on the same planet and starts it by massacring a dozen Marines alongside a massive Praetorian. Now that's a way to make an opening statement. I suspect that the developers intended for us to play the campaigns in this order, even if you have the freedom of doing them however you like. But I have to say that handily killing a Praetorian in the first level after only being able to kill them with a huge minigun in the final stages of the Marine campaign is a really cool way to show just how of an awesome force the Predator is. In the same vein, after feeling like prey, the game gives you now all the tools to feel like a true hunter. You don't get all the fancy gear from the start, but the power of the cloak, the very high jumps you can pull off, and the thermal vision gives you the ability to make short work of those poor Marines you encounter regardless. The hunt turns sour pretty fast when the commanding general of the research facility manages to capture two of your clanmates, therefore this turns into a rescue mission. Infiltrating the facility isn't very difficult considering how capable you are against the Marines. The biggest challenge comes from the auto turret and the combat scenes, but you are more or less a force of nature against the helpless Marines. I have to say it's interesting to see the same places you previously visited during the Marine campaign. Of course, it's asset recycling as well, but it makes perfect sense here and I won't complain at all. What I will complain about is the energy mechanic and how it's handled by the game. Every time you run low, you can simply pop up the energy sift device that magically recharges you to full with no cooldowns or limits. Every time you get injured, you get out your medkit and heal to max health again with no cooldowns or limits. Sometimes you don't have enough energy to perform the latter, so you first pull out the energy sift, then the medkit, then the energy sift again for max health and energy. Yay! I get it. It's entirely in line with the lore and all that, but I find it to be a quite poor implementation. It really breaks the pacing and worst of all, it's really overpowered. Sure, in multiplayer you don't have time to pull stunts like this, but against the AI it's basically like playing with cheats. You get hit or use some energy, charge it up before going to the next room, no problem. The advancement through the facility doesn't go as planned, since General Rykov is very adamant in capturing you and manages to pull it off. Thankfully, during your capture, you somehow wake up and manage to escape. Discovering that your clanmates are dead after being subjected to horrible experiments and that the general has your mask, your main goal now becomes to regain your lost honor by recovering it. The whole reason behind the general's determination to capture and kill your kind is a long-standing grudge after surviving an attack 20 years prior to the events of the campaign, which left him with a grievous injury that made him dependent on illicit pain medication to function properly. This reveal showcases another strength of the game's approach to the story. During the Marine campaign you met both General Rykov and Dr. Eisenberg, but you have little to no access to this side of their characters. It just seemed that Eisenberg was shifty and performing quite a few unethical experiments, and Rykov was trying to avenge the death of his men and that he blames Frosty for. But now, as the Predator, you see that the good doctor is performing some monstrous research, and Rykov is in fact very obsessed with predators, never really caring about the xenomorph threat in comparison. This explains in part why he was so willing to send Frosty's teammates to their deaths instead of having them assist the defense against the alien invasion. The final part of this campaign is more or less a hunt for Rykov, but before getting to him you have to pass through isolated parts of the planet infested with lots and lots of xenomorphs, and many areas filled with a mixture of both xenos and marines. Admittedly, this section solidifies a trend that's become more and more pronounced since around the first half of the campaign, which is a shift towards more of a traditional action game. In part it's because the aliens can sense you regardless of your cloaking device, and there are some instances where the game really throws them in your way. But because the levels are more congested, you can't really sneak around marines either, and despite the fact that it makes sense for the story to have them on full alert and ready to fight you, it's still a bit of a shame. But a bigger shame is the gear you get in your possession, namely the shoulder cannon. We all know it, it's the quintessential Predator weapon, but man does it outshine all of his equipment. It's strong, you can charge it, you can fire it in rapid succession, it homes in if you're using the right visual sensor and only uses a little bit of energy for each shot. Yes, in the last half of the game, with few exceptions, you can play exclusively with the shoulder cannon and fall even deeper into the dreaded heal recharge cycle I've mentioned earlier as a result. It unfortunately makes for a less interesting end of a campaign than the early missions gave hope for. Doesn't help that the Marine AI is not as good as the aliens, as they have problems navigating the levels sometimes. This really takes the oomph from the game's attempt to make you feel hunted and vulnerable against them in the later part of the campaign. But on the other hand, the Alien campaign has the strongest start of them all. You don't get to play as a drone from the get-go, but only as a humble facehugger that just left his egg and is in search for a suitable host to kickstart his evolution. After impregnating a willing host, you take the role of the chestburster that's searching for food in order to evolve into the drone we all know and love. Playing during the initial phases of an alien's life cycle results in one of the most memorable moments in gaming for yours truly, and one that stuck with me up until now. They really knocked it out of the park with this one. These first two levels are also a good source of world building for how things were going in the research facility in the weeks prior to the incident. This place wasn't as a tightly run ship as it was previously left to be understood. The egg that you hatched from was meant to be a part of some illicit traffic that was also involving the ancient artifacts that were supposedly being researched here. All this was coordinated by Dr. Eisenberg, whose real motivation is in fact to control the planet's alien hive as a result of his traumatic experience with them, a goal that puts him at odds with the corporation that gave him the control and resources of this expedition. This campaign is straightforward, which is understandable since you're playing as an alien after all. Once you become a drone, you start attacking the base and release captured aliens, causing mayhem in the process. At the same time, you also fight the Predator, which you quite easily defeat because, let's be honest, melee fights were not masterfully implemented in 2001. It was either this awkward duel or being massacred by the Predator's weapons as it happens later on. Anyway, weeks later, with the arrival of the Marines and the activation of the security grid, you are able to infiltrate the research facility and proceed with liberating the artificial hive. Coincidentally, you also rescue the predator you played as right before his alien impregnation experiment was about to take place. The last part of the campaign involves the attempt to rescue the Empress that was captured by Eisenberg in his misguided hope to instantly gain control of the entire hive. I have to admit that the plot twist of having him actually be an android took me by surprise, and it surely sweetened the sour end of the campaign. Couldn't talk much about the story, but I can surely discuss the gameplay. Well, the most striking thing initially is how slow you feel running around. It makes sense from a multiplayer balancing perspective, since in the first game they were by far the best race to play as because of this, but it's a bit of a bummer to feel as if you're strolling through the hallways in single player. The wall climbing is very much improved though, no more glitchy walls to send you straight to the bathroom barfing. Fortunately, you also have the pounce move, which is kinda ridiculous in all of honesty, but it really doesn't address the speed issue, particularly since all marines attack you with hit scan weapons, so unless you ambush and instantly headshot them, you can easily die to just one man. I don't find it a huge problem in all honesty, but if you were expecting to run at light speed like you did in Rebellion's iteration, you'll be sorely disappointed, just like I felt after the Predator encounters. As much as I praised the way the Marine campaign handled them, here the three battles kinda fall short. The first one reminded me of my complaints from the previous video, and the last two fights varied between being insta-killed by the shoulder cannon if I wasn't at the right distance to him, or having an awkward circle strafing session, or even worse, getting shot with a net gun and having the third predator simply stay and look at me while I struggle to get free every single time. Yeah. Now that I covered all three campaigns at such lengths, do you want to know the best part about them? All of them combined took me just 8 hours to complete. Yeah, despite being 3 hours tops each, they had so much detail put into them that I can't even believe I was able to blabber on about for so long. The best part is that I haven't even covered absolutely everything. Granted, there's the Primal Hunt expansion as well that comes with 3 additional campaigns that tie some of the loose ends of the story, but frankly, from a gameplay perspective, they're not really worth your time, since they don't really do anything differently. Play them for the story at most. But you shouldn't worry about deciding whether to play the expansion or not, since the entire game can be obtained legitimately in its complete form via the aforementioned AVP Unknown project. I always mention how to buy games, but in this case there are really no other methods, and I doubt there will be anytime soon, just like it happens with both No One Lives Forever games. Fortunately, the installation process is explained reasonably well and is perfectly compatible with modern systems. Even better, it has a perfectly functional multiplayer, and sometimes you can even find people to play with. Quite impressive for a game that was relying on GameSpy servers and had to be modified by the community in order to fix this feature once that service went down. In case it still needs to be said, I absolutely recommend this game. It's not perfect, but Monolith has a very good track record with FPS games. Bloodtooth and Aliens vs Predator 2 makes no exceptions. I loved playing it as a teenager, and I certainly enjoyed my time when preparing for this review. It's got an engaging gameplay, an engaging story, and I frankly consider it to be the best AVP title that's been ever made for PC. Sorry Rebellion, I wasn't too hot for the other AVP you've made either. I still like your channel, Jason, you're so atypical nerd. Thanks for sticking around. Click stuff that helps the channel, you know the drill. And until next time, cheers.